Delighted to be here and see so many people here today. So just a little bit about my background and my journey, I guess. I started my career in the world of academia, specialising in behavioural change. So I was a psychology lecturer and specialised in behaviour change in health psychology. So helping people to adopt healthier lifestyles, she says, having not taken her own medicine. Practice safer sex, all those sorts of interesting, really interesting, fascinating things. I thought I'd do that forever, actually. But I was doing it in Preston in Lancashire. Now, has anyone ever been to Preston, Lancashire? Anyone from Preston, Lancashire? Put your hands up. Okay. Are you from Preston?
I'm from Clitheroe.
I need to be careful what I say then. I love...
I'm in the Ribble Valley.
That's all right. You're all right then. No, I love Preston. I had a wonderful time up there. But I think as you will say this is true. It does rain a lot up there, right? Yeah? It really does rain a lot. And you can't leave the house without a brolly when you live in Lancashire. So after many years of, well, a few years of lecturing, loving it in behavioural change, I moved to Brighton. Anyone from Brighton? Live in Brighton? Visited Brighton? Anyone ever been to Brighton? Yay! Most people have been to Brighton on a hen or stag do over the years. Anyway, Brighton is very sunny, and I rather naively thought, oh, I'll just get a lecturing job in Brighton like you do when you're in your 20s. Turned up in Brighton and there were no lecturing jobs going, so I thought, okay, what am I going to do? I ended up getting a job for what was the local energy board, Seaboard. And remember the days of the energy board? Yeah, local, yeah. Long time ago, lots of change there. Just got really lucky in that the hiring manager had, huge amount of insight in that she could see how my skills in behavioural change were very transferable to the corporate world. I'm very glad she saw that because I didn't really have a clue at the time. I just thought that looks like an interesting job. I'll go for it. So I started working at the end of the 90s for Seaboard, then became EDF. And my background was. She brought me in originally to do the staff survey. I had a background as a research psychologist. Oh, you could do research, you could do the staff survey. And she's like, oh, actually, you can do a bit of internal comms while you're there. And I looked after well-being because I had a background in health psychology. So it's like, yeah, you can do well-being as well. And while you're there, we just do a bit of CSR. So I had this kind of portfolio of stuff that I did that was really all about creating a great place to work, but I didn't really have a label for it. And about the kind of mid-2000s, I came across this term employee engagement, and I was like, actually, that's really helpful for me. And I know we can have lots of debates, not today, about the term engagement and how helpful it is or not. But for me at the time, I was like, brilliant, that's what I do, it's employee engagement. It's all about creating a great place to work, helping kind of motivate people to be the best they can be whilst they're here. So that's kind of how I fell into this world of engagement. And I worked 10 years in-house, so I know what it feels like to be in this constant changing environment. So I'll share some of my war stories as we go through the presentation. And then set up People Lab 7 years ago and worked with lots of really interesting clients all over the place in employee engagement. But I guess to start with, I'd say employee engagement actually is all about change. There's a purpose to engaging people. We engage people because we want something to happen. We might want people to stop leaving, we might want people to recommend it as a great place to work, we might want people to be nicer to customers, but essentially there is a purpose to engagement which is all about change. Now, given that I've only got probably about 20 minutes now, what I thought I would do is kind of share with you, I guess, my golden nuggets, my top tips, the things that I've learned along the way that have really helped me in terms of using engagement as a lever for change, or even using change as a lever to help engage people. Works either way. And I'm going to look at engagement from kind of two different perspectives. So the first perspective is really look at an engagement as a kind of a philosophy, what I call big picture engagement. So engagement which is all about creating a great place to work. Some organisations focus on engagement because it just feels like the right thing to do. Like, of course we want an engaged workforce, why wouldn't we? Other organisations are much more commercial about it. They're much more clear on why they need an engaged workforce. But it's all about kind of saying, actually, if we get it right with our people and we engage them, then the rest will follow. And in actual fact, that is a brilliant foundation for making change happen. If organisations are focusing on this kind of philosophy of engagement, this big picture engagement, there's already a great foundation for change. So we did some research about this time last year, actually, looking at the state of engagement, actually globally. And a really interesting report called Spotlight on Engagement. If you want a copy, let me know. We can let you have a copy. Lots of interesting findings. But what we found is that there is a gap. So what we hear from people is that there's a huge amount of focus on engagement. It's high on the agenda for HR professionals. It's one of the biggest challenges organisations are facing. Lots of people are talking about it. Lots of people are doing it. But we're not very good at it. It's pretty pathetic. 39% of employees in the UK are engaged, according to the CIPD. If you take Gallup's view, that goes down quite significantly. I think they say about 13% of employees globally are engaged. Depends what report you look at. But basically, organisations are pretty poor at engaging their people. Do you agree with that? Yeah. No? Yeah? Okay. So you might think, oh, it's all really interesting. What the hell has this got to do with change? So in terms of the relevance of this for change, it starts to become interesting when we look at the barriers to successful change. So I'm sure you recognise some of these. There are many more, but I've taken the kind of key barriers that are cited in the various literature you read around why change fails. So, change fatigue and not honouring the past. So we talked about that on our table, actually, the fact that organisations very rarely allow change to embed, it's on to the next thing. And the new senior team come in, not invented here, want to do things our way, and it's just, people are just like, oh, for goodness sake, you know, what's this all about? Lack of understanding and vision. So that was brought up on the tables before, I think, around, you know, what's the vision? Where the hell are we actually going with this? And also, I don't get it. I don't get why. What's the why? What's the big why around this change? If you explain that to me, I might be on board, but I just don't get it. Lack of employee involvement. So change done to people rather than with people. People don't tend to change what they're doing if they're just told to. I think there's a thing going around Facebook, you know, no one ever calmed down from being told to calm down, you know, it just doesn't work. You must do this differently. Well, why? Why would I bother? What's the wrong reason for doing that? And leaders and managers. Now, poor old leaders and managers get a really tough time, I think, in engagement and comms and change and this whole world. It's like, it's always their fault, isn't it? We blame them quite a lot. Well, it's the leaders, can't get the line managers to be on board. It's, you know, it's senior team. They're not singing from the same hymn sheet. What I've found in my experience, and also from the Spotlight research that we did, is that companies are very poor at investing energy, effort, and time in their line managers to help them be good at this stuff. Just to kind of expect them to know how to do it. Well, you're a line manager. You should be able to engage your people. You should be able to help drive the change through. And they're going, you know what, I have no idea what you're talking about. What's driving change even mean? You know, speaking English to me. Now, the reason this is relevant when it comes to big picture engagement is you'll see these barriers to change map really beautifully onto what we call the enablers. So anyone come across the enablers of engagement? Hands up, who's come across this before? Okay, so this is a framework for change, framework for engagement that was first kind of talked about, published with the Engage for Success movement back in 2009. So they talk about, although there is a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to engagement, there's a kind of a framework that you can use to think, well, actually, what do we need to do to create a great place to work, to create, you know, an engaged workforce? And a lot of the activity kind of falls into one of these four buckets. So line managers. So clearly, line managers play a critical role when it comes to engagement and a critical role when it comes to change. I've seen it so many times when there's some big change going on and, you know, the senior team have like a year to get their heads around it, and then the kind of next level down, they might go to a 2-day conference, and then the next level down might have a half-day workshop, and the poor old frontline managers literally get a PowerPoint presentation on a Friday, and they're told to speak to their people about it on a Monday, and they're going, oh, I don't know what the hell's going on, no idea. So line managers are really critical for engagement and for change. Employee voice. So this is about, you know, employees genuinely feeling that they are listened to within an organisation. They have a voice and it matters and people are listening to them. Really important for engagement. And actually at People Lab we go one step further than that. We talk about another enabler which isn't on here, which is employee involvement. which is not just about talking about something, it's actually about being able to do something, so having some autonomy over the change. Strategic narrative obviously links to the vision piece that I talked about, so having a really clear, compelling vision of where we're going and why, critical. And integrity is about matching the say with the do. And again, seeing so many changes that happen, you think, well, hang on a minute, aren't we supposed to be this sort of organisation, but you're doing this over here and it doesn't really make sense, and actually I don't really believe you or trust you anymore. So going back to kind of how big picture engagement is important for change, actually if we focus on big picture engagement and getting a culture which is engaging and creating a great place to work and focusing on these enablers, then that in itself is a fantastic foundation for change. And this slide here is some results from our survey. So we asked people which of these kind of enablers they were looking at, and they seem to be pretty well adopted, which makes me think people aren't really being quite honest about what they're doing, because if they were really well adopted, we wouldn't see that engagement gap that I mentioned at the beginning. So in terms of how to overcome this, what we can do is run what we call an employee engagement health check. And again, what I'll do is I will forward a really short, simple diagnostic tool that we use to Melody and the Kogan Page guys to share with all of you. It's just a really quick, simple diagnostic tool for you to use to say, how am I doing, or how's the organisation doing within those 4 areas of engagement plus employee involvement. So you can see, where do we need to focus our attention. Might be really, really good at strategic narrative, but not so great with line managers. So it just helps you to think, what do we need to do to create a great foundation for change? So any questions on that before I move on? Yes?
I was interested, could you just go back a couple of slides to the sort of barriers, if you wouldn't mind? So I was interested in that because for me, human resources should be sat as a barrier to employee engagement. I just wonder if that's come up with particular reference to grievance, discipline, bullying procedures, because my experience of talking to leaders and managers about why they don't do things is they're fearful they'll be suspended and investigated by HR, and that impedes engagement. So for me, I'm interested in the role that human resources professionals play as a potential barrier, and also then as a driver of engagement, the role that HR can play as a driver by transforming the employee handbook and taking out the more draconian adversarial systems, which for me is a really big but missing part of the engagement debate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you could definitely add quite a lot to that, and I wouldn't disagree with that. And I kind of want to go off on a tangent now, and I'm trying to rein myself back. But yes, in a nutshell, I completely agree. And the more forward-thinking HRDs and managers we work with are all about what we call transformational engagement, which is seeing engagement as part and parcel of the culture of the organisation, whereas the sort of those who perhaps need some help are much more transactional. It's about doing a survey and fixing some stuff that's broken. So it's kind of a project-based piece, if that makes sense. So I would agree with that. Yes, more questions?
Can we just get the mic over?
Yes.
All right, sorry.
Have the mic.
I just wanted to ask a quick question about employee voice. We have a really well-established consultation model, which covers all different parts of the business. And historically, it was used as a vehicle to communicate quite a lot of change where it affected everyone. That seems to have dropped off a bit of late. And I just wondered how much value you think there is in using that vehicle more so, and encouraging people to see that as a group of representatives that represent the microcosm of the company and not just the union opinion or the employee rep opinion. Because I see some companies really use it really well and some not, and I've just wondered what your views were on that, around employee voice.
Yeah, I think that model works really well in some organisations, not in others. Depends again on the culture of the organisation, the extent to which there is trust. What I think works well is in partnership with that, this kind of 2.0 thing we're talking about, which is particularly with things like the rise of social media, people are much more comfortable and also expect to have channels where they can feedback in a much more ongoing, regular way. So yeah, it's great I've got a representative, but actually, do I trust them to really get my point across? And actually, how well do I feel listened if I've got to go through somebody else? So yes, I'm not saying it doesn't work, it can work really, really well, but I think people have a much higher expectation now of having channels and ways to make their voice heard and to feel like they've been listened to. And you know, the technological advances mean it's much easier now for companies to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think our consultation model is still operating in the old world. It hasn't really caught up, even though we're an IT company, with all the social media piece, and I think there's a lot more maybe we could do there. So that group of people have felt to be more present.
Yeah.
They are a really important voice.
Yeah, yeah. I think both works. If you get both working really well, that's great. It's good to have that formal channel, the consultation channel, but equally it's good to have the much more kind of informal, regular collaboration discussion. I can make my voice heard.
Yeah, we find actually all our sort of graduates and apprentices are amazing at this. You know, we have Twitter pages, they're twittering, doing work on the train and telling everyone about it and how fabulous Capgemini are to work for. And I find that really interesting because it's such a cultural shift from different other groups in our organisation that just wouldn't.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, definitely. Very quickly, as an aside, we've just done the first part of some research on enterprise social networks, which is social media inside an organisation, and the opportunity to impact engagement and well-being. So it might be useful to have a chat about that afterwards. Anyone else interested as well, give me a shout on that. Okay, so that's kind of big picture engagement. The other way that we can look at this is kind of on a more kind of change-based, kind of traditional change-based programmatic kind of way of looking at it. And this is much more about how do we engage people through our change. So we're going through a big culture change, or we're changing our brand, or a big strategy change. Something is going on, and we need to take people from A to B. This is a model, we've probably seen very similar models that you know doing the rounds. This is the model we use, it's called the engagement curve. I'm a big fan of keeping things simple, and this is a really helpful way to get people to think about the journey you want employees to go on. So we want them to go from kind of knowing about something, I kind of heard about that, understanding, yeah, I get it, I might not like it, but I get it, through to positive perception, okay, now I'm maybe starting to think this just could be a good idea, through to actual behavioural change, through to something which is just embedded into the culture of the organisation. It's the way we do things around here. And I really like this model, obviously, because it's our model. If I didn't like it, I wouldn't be using it. But I really like it because it's a way of understanding where people are on this curve and setting objectives to see where you are on the change journey and putting measures in place to see where people are. So, for example, you can ask some really simple questions around, say, understanding. You know, rather than saying, do you understand it? People go, yeah, I do. It's fascinating if you ask, and could you explain it to a colleague? People go, oh no, I don't think I could actually. People are quite honest in my experience of using this model for a very long time. So you can ask questions like that, you know, could you explain this change is happening? Not quite sure. Do you think it's right for the company or the organisation? That's a good way of testing positive perception. What are you personally going to do differently to make this happen? I have no idea. And in my experience, when it comes to kind of big change, quite often people sort of nod enthusiastically but think, oh, that's something that everyone else is sorting out. I'm okay. I don't need to do anything differently, which is often why change fails. People aren't really clear about what they need to do differently. So I'm going to share with you now, building on Sarah's talk on emergent change, a model that have used over the years that is probably the most useful change model I use is a model of viral change. Has anyone come across viral change? The work of Leandro Herrero? If you haven't, I'd really recommend you check his book out. What I love about it is dead practical. It's not too kind of academic, it's really practical and really good tools to help you do this. So what Leandro Herrero talks about is that very often organisations view change as like a tsunami starting at the top and washing out of the organisation, and by the time it gets to the bottom, everyone's drowned. No, everyone's changed. It's all wonderful. But in actual fact, he argues that change is much more like the kind of butterfly effect. And people like Malcolm Gladwell have talked about this in things like tipping points. You've come across that, I'm sure. And that he argues that change is much more subtle than that. It's great having Kotter's 8 steps, however many steps it is, but actually in real life, change doesn't happen that way. And people like Malcolm Gladwell in Tipping Point and Leandro Herrero you know, give some great examples of how this kind of viral change phenomenon works. And I really like, the one that I quite often talk about is the green movement. So in the 1970s, the only people that recycled and were into kind of like, you know, being green were like mad hippies, you know, everyone else, you know, what on earth are you talking about? And in the 1980s, kind of a few more people got on the bus in terms of recycling and, you know, living a more green life. And then when I first moved to Brighton in the 90s, I got my Magpie box, I paid £2 and they took my recycling away. And now, even my parents and grandparents recycle. It's just a given, it's a social norm. You know, we pass bins out in the street and we'll put out the right piece of rubbish in the right bin. We don't even think about it. Was there a big kind of campaign from the government about how we had to do things differently and recycle? No, there wasn't. So it's kind of, you know, some of these things spread a lot more virally. And one of the ways to sort of think about this and why this approach is so useful is that very often when we're planning change or thinking about change, we get in a room and we put up an org chart and we say, right, what we'll do is we'll start here and then they can talk to them and it will tsunami go down, brilliant, and then everybody will be doing something differently and it'll be wonderful and great, fantastic. But in actual fact, this is really what organisations look like. You know, this is a network map of an organisation, can't remember which one, that shows kind of have people who are very influential in organisations. In fact, I was just talking to Sue before about how influential PAs are. Anyone that's done any sort of change programme, you know, you don't get the PAs on side, it ain't going to happen. You know, people are very influential that perhaps don't feature on that org chart as being as influential as they are. So, in terms of viral change then, just kind of trying to sort of give you a summary of what Leandro Herrera talks about. He talks about these myths of change. What he says is that, you know, we think that big change requires big actions. We need a big, massive launch event, spend £200,000 and convince everybody. And he said, actually, that's a myth. We don't necessarily need that. It may or may not be the right thing to do. Sometimes it's about kind of figuring out what are the small, simple behaviours we need to change and how do we kind of light those small little fires across the organisation. People are naturally resistant to change. Actually, a lot of psychology shows that human beings quite like change if it's beneficial to them, if it works for them, if they get the reason behind it. You know, we're not kind of naturally resistant to change at all. Myth 3, people are rational and will accept logical, rational reasons for change is probably my favourite myth, really. So, anyone here ever been involved in an office move change? Hands up? Yeah? So one of my most difficult, most challenging change pieces of work in my entire career has been an office move change where we got rid of people's personal bins. Anyone ever had that experience? We're getting rid of their bins and they had to walk to the end of their little bit and put rubbish in a communal bin. Oh my God. The unions got involved in everything. It was an absolute nightmare. And yet, a big change I was involved at many years ago at an insurance company was getting rid of the final salary pension scheme. Went through pretty, it wasn't nice, but it went through that hitch because people got why it needed to happen. If they didn't sign up to the new pension arrangements, they wouldn't be a business, they wouldn't have a job. You know, so you think, God, that's going to be really hardcore. Getting rid of the final salary pension is going to be really painful. Actually, it was okay, but getting rid of people's personal bins, nightmare. So you can't call it. You can do all the planning in the world, but you can't call it. And it's because we're very emotional beings, you know, and you never quite know, you know, what triggers you're going to sort of hit with people and what things they care about, what things they're passionate about. It's often the things that you are least expecting that really challenge people and get them all emotional about stuff. And the vision for change needs to come from the top and be cascaded down. So I think that as long as you have at least some support at the top, actually it's a hell of a lot of stuff you can get on with. So what I'd like you to do is just a couple of minutes on your tables, have a conversation about these, and are there any others that you'd like to add to that list? And any of them that you agree with or disagree with, because he's quite out there in his thinking, Leandro Herrera. Some of it I'm like I'm not quite sure about that. So just a couple of minutes conversation on your table about these myths, any others that you'd add, and any that you think perhaps are right or wrong. Okay? Right then, okay, I'm going to move you swiftly on. So I'm not going to make every table feedback, but has anyone got any kind of really interesting insights or observations or stories they want to share?
Yes, one here.
Yes, brilliant, thank you. You've been volunteered. You volunteered.
Okay, so we're talking about the bins as a real problem. And I was just saying that I've done a move and a merge. The move was the merge into a parent company. Very painful, potentially. So what we did was, and we thought we might lose everybody. We'd end up moving to an empty floor. So what we did was we actually gave people the opportunity to tell us how they felt it could be done. And it really worked. So we trusted them to tell us, and we would have regular, well actually what we did was we had lunchtime in the boardroom where everyone brought a sandwich. It was very loose, but basically we're getting them to talk about how it could work and what was the best thing. And it did work, definitely worked.
Brilliant, thank you.
Nobody left.
That's brilliant, thank you for sharing that. It's a really good example of employee involvement, and it does work, definitely. Anyone else got any insights or observations? Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. We had a couple of things. One is that Sarah said she doesn't think the 50-year-old change models are relevant anymore in today's sort of more fluid, agile organisations. The idea that change has to be controlled by a process is an assumption, and maybe it can be emergent and just sort of occur spontaneously. My thought was that a lot of these myths depend on culture. So there are some cultures where it's true that vision for change needs to come from the top, if it's a very hierarchical culture where authority is important. There are some cultures where it's true that people are naturally comfortable with change, but it is true that some are resistant. So I think, especially working in multicultural settings, we need to be aware of both the home culture of the organisation and the cultures of the people we're working with to implement change, because some of them, this will be true.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Right, I'm going to move on because I'm conscious that we're nearly out of time, and I've got my best bits to share with you. So, you know, she says raising your expectations ridiculously high. So I'm just going to share with you like my absolute golden nuggets of things that have really served me well over the years. And the first one that from Leandro Herrero is this idea of behavioural levels. Now, don't get too tied up in the macro, molecular, atomic, all that sort of stuff. What I love about this kind of concept is this idea of making change really tangible for people. So in the world of engagement, in the world of communication, in the world of change, very often we talk in quite abstract, conceptual language. So for example, we'll say, yeah, we need more collaboration, or we need more engagement, we need better communication. Nobody in the organisation is going to disagree with that. It's a good thing, right? Yeah, of course we do, everyone nods. But it's this kind of big, abstract, conceptual thing out there that somebody else is fixing and sorting, and that doesn't affect me, and I don't need to do it because I'm already really good at this stuff anyway. And actually, I'm not even quite sure if I was to get better at engagement or get better at communication or collaboration, I wouldn't have a clue what I'd actually have to do anyway. So what I've found works really, really well is to take these concepts that we're talking about and break them down into what this actually means, or get not me to do it, but to get employees to do it for themselves. So if you were to collaborate more with your colleagues, what would that look like? What would you do? Or if you were to improve your communication with your colleagues, what would you do? And when you sort of work through this with people, to begin with, it can feel a little bit like, really? A little bit like, I don't want to do it, they're a bit resistant. But very quick example, I did a piece of work with the Ministry of Justice, a particular team. They're massive organisations, so I can say that, but I won't tell you which team it was. It was a team in the MOJ who were really, really broken. Things were not good. They were very disengaged, and they realised they just weren't talking to each other. They weren't a team at all. And we worked with a bunch of change agents, which is my second top tip, and I'll come to that in a minute, to sort of say, well, what needs to happen? What needs to change? And they said, we just need to talk more. And if they'd gone out and said, well, we've figured it out, guys, we just need to talk more, everyone would have gone, oh, yeah, okay. Right, and nothing would have changed. But what they did was they got really specific on what they could do as change agents to role model different behaviours. And they said, okay, sort of rolling their eyes at me, all right, then, okay, what I'll do is when I walk into work every day, I will make sure I say hello to at least 3 people on the way to my desk. And I will choose an email in both morning and afternoon that I won't do as an email. I will go and speak to the person or pick up the phone. And I will, once a week on a Friday, when I go to lunch, I'll invite other colleagues along that I don't normally speak to. And they were sort of a little bit like, it just feels a bit basic, is this really going to work? And they all committed to doing really tangible stuff like that. And I worked with them for quite a while, and literally 2 weeks later when I was back to continue the work with them, they're like, oh my God, I can't believe it. It's actually really working. You know, so it sounds a bit basic, but it really, really helps to break it down to small, tangible actions that people can feel they can own and achieve themselves. It doesn't seem this big, overwhelming thing. It's something small they can do. So that's my first real top tip that really helps. And the second one is really using the champions or change agents approach. The table over there in the last talk, he was talking about kind of consultants parachuting in, and I worked 10 years in-house, you know, it's always like, oh God, how much are they costing? Here we go again, you know. And actually what works so much better is for the consultants who have the knowledge and expertise to work with a group of change agents, change champions, whatever you want to call them. Those people on that network analysis map that I showed you, they're the nodes, they're the people with influence. Work with them to skill them up, to transfer knowledge and expertise to them so that whatever change you're trying to bring about is sustainable long after the consultants have left the room, because they become the experts. And to work with them to figure out these small changes that need to happen and let them to go out and just start doing stuff, just start making changes and give them that autonomy to do that. So I would say a vast majority of the work that we do within the field of engagement we use this approach with, we use the champions approach with, and it works fantastically well. I've got some case studies on the tables that you can read through with really brilliant ROI that brings this to life. So it really, really does work. So a few top tips there. Change champions is probably the key one. The non-negotiable behaviours is also critical. And really putting the time and effort and energy into nurturing those champions and getting them really ready for the change and ready for success. So that's my other absolute golden nugget top tip. A few other techniques around there that help to kind of take people through that engagement curve. So the kind of awareness understanding piece I talked about before is quite easy, dare I say it, with kind of traditional internal comms channels. We can get stuff out to people. But once you go with that dotted line, how do you create positive perception and commitment? These are some ideas, some things that you can do. I make no apology for putting conversation up there. I've had some pushback. Really, putting conversations up there? I think we're really crap at conversations in organisations, and we need to get better at it. We don't talk in a conversational way. We talk in a very stiff, formal way. We need to get better at having real conversations as human beings with each other. Employee-led change I've talked about. Appreciative inquiry. Has anyone come across appreciative inquiry? It's, again, a really powerful but really simple tool for change, and I've used this a lot. And it takes what we call a strength-based approach. And again, taking a strength-based approach in my experience is another great tool for making change happen, engaging people through change. So what does good look like? What could the future be like? How are we going to get there? Rather than let's look at all the stuff that's broken and why we need to fix it. It's a very different conversation, but the outcome is the same. So if you have the kind of positive conversation, taking a strength-based approach, people are much more likely to go with you. In your slide, or in the slides, I have put an example of a stage from appreciative inquiry, which is one that I use called peak experience. And this asks people to, I've used an example of engagement. So just really simply getting people to talk about a time when they loved what they were doing and have conversations with people about what was happening there, what it looked like, what it felt like, and what can they learn from that. You can use the same approach with any change that's going on. So let's talk about a time when we were really good at change, or let's talk about a time when you really enjoyed change, whatever it might be. And you get so much rich insight that you can build on from that rather than what's broken and why do we need to fix it. So that's my other kind of top tip, is to use a strength-based approach if possible. Okay, so in summary, what can you do? You can run a health check to see which of those enablers you're good at and where you need to focus, and we can share our diagnostic tool with you to enable you to do that. Focus on the enablers to create a great place to work, which is a brilliant foundation for change per se. Get your champions in place. Again, we've got lots of resources I can share with you on that, even a champion's profile in terms of what do these people look like, what sort of skills and attributes do they have, who are they? Identify the small, tangible behaviours to role model, sort of things people could start to do differently. Take a strengths-based approach if possible, and focus on engaging your workforce, and I believe the rest will follow. I think that's it from me. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.